The sun had barely risen over the vast prairie when the wind shifted. Dry stalks of hay trembled as a soft gust stirred the silence, exposing something unnatural in the middle of the golden sprawl, bare toes, crusted with dirt and blood, protruding from the tangled grass. She was lying there, unmoving. Her dress, once a pale cotton blue, was shredded and streaked with dried blood. One side of her face was swollen, lips split, dark curls matted to her cheeks with sweat and grime. Rope burns ringed her wrists, bruised and raw. The prairie was empty for miles. There were no birds, only the buzz of flies. From the south, a rider approached at a cautious pace. The figure on the horse wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a battered duster coat flapping as the wind picked up again. His rifle was slung behind the saddle, but his hand rested loosely on its stock. As he drew closer, he reined in his mare with a quiet murmur. He didn't speak at first. Just sat there, staring down at the body in the grass, jaw tight. Then he dismounted in one fluid motion, boots crunching in the dry earth as he stepped forward. She looked like death itself, until he knelt beside her and touched 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse. Faint but there. His breath caught. Gently, he unscrewed the top of his canteen, angled it to her lips. The first splash of water made her flinch. Her eyes opened a fraction, dull, glazed. He saw fear there, rooted deep, but then her gaze met his. Something softened. "You're all right," he said, voice low and sure. "You're safe now." She blinked. Then her eyes rolled back, and she slipped again into unconsciousness. He lifted her in his arms, light as a child, and carried her to his horse. She didn't stir. Not even when he wrapped her in his coat and slung her across the saddle with care, as though afraid to break her. It was a half-day ride back to his land, but he didn't stop. Not when the sun climbed high or when the heat pressed down like judgment. He only paused once, to wet her lips again and check the steady but shallow rise and fall of her chest. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk was falling. The light filtered orange through the cottonwoods. He laid her on a straw mattress inside and stripped off his coat, sweat lining his neck. The place was sparse. 1 room, 1 table, 1 bed, but clean. Quiet. He boiled water on the small iron stove, hands steady. As the kettle hissed, he found a cloth and knelt beside her. Her skin was hot. Feverish. He dabbed gently at the dried blood near her brow, revealing a nasty cut. Her breathing hitched, but she didn't wake. He worked in silence, cleaned the wounds, pulled the torn boots from her feet and laid a blanket over her. In the firelight, her face looked younger. Early 20s, maybe. Starved, beaten, but not broken. She had the look of someone who had survived something unthinkable and hadn't yet realized she was still alive. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the hearth, sharpening his knife, listening to the wind and her soft murmurs, fragments of nightmares slipping from her throat. She said names he didn't recognize, begged someone to stop, cried for a mother. Then silence. Sometime past midnight, the fever broke. She stirred again, eyes glassy, searching the shadows until they landed on him. She flinched, scrambling upright, her breath a wild rasp. He didn't move. "You're in my cabin," he said softly. "I found you in the hayfield west of Elk Creek. You were alone, tied up, near dead." She squinted, pressing a hand to her side. The pain made her hiss. "You, who are you?" "Eli Thatcher. Rancher. Just me out here." She didn't answer, just stared at the door behind him. "I'm not keeping you," he said, reading the look. "You want to leave, you can. But you've got cracked ribs and a fever hanging on. If you walk out now, you won't get far." Her shoulders slumped. She closed her eyes, chest heaving. Then, softer than a whisper, she said, "Clara?" He nodded once. "You need water?" She hesitated, then nodded. He brought her the canteen again, holding it as she drank. Her hands trembled. They didn't speak much after that. She laid back down slowly, as if unsure the bed was real. Eli returned to his chair, pulled his coat around him. The fire crackled between them. At dawn, He heard her moving again. This time with less fear, more clarity. She stood with effort, walking to the window, leaning on the sill. The prairie spread wide beyond, innocent, golden, hiding everything and nothing. "You got a wife?" she asked without turning. He shook his head. "Buried her. A long time ago." She nodded like that made sense, then turned, her eyes finally meeting his without flinching. "You saved me." He looked away, uncomfortable with praise. Did what anyone decent would do. Her lips curved. It wasn't quite a smile, but something close. "No," she said. "Most men would have left me there." He said nothing. Outside, the morning wind rustled through the hayfields again. The world looked unchanged, but for the two people inside the cabin, something had shifted. A thread had been tied. Fragile, quiet. But there. She stepped away from the window, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands found her lap. Twisted her fingers. Eyes dark with something more than pain. "There's people out there," she said, voice low. "Men. I don't think they'll stop looking." Eli stood. Walked to the stove. Poured hot water into a chipped mug and slid it toward her. "Then they'll have to deal with me," he said, his voice as solid as the walls around them. Clara stared at him for a long time. Not with gratitude. With disbelief. And maybe the smallest flicker of trust. She took the mug. Sipped slow. And for the first time in days, her hands stopped shaking. Clara woke to birdsong. The soft coo of doves perched in the cottonwoods, the distant whinny of a horse. The light spilling in from the cabin's window was gentler now, less harsh than the sun that had scorched her skin days before. Her body still ached, sharp reminders in her ribs and shoulder, but the fever had loosened its grip. She sat up slowly, fingers brushing the worn quilt. The scent of black coffee drifted in from the other room. Eli was outside, she could hear him, his steady voice murmuring to the mare as he brushed her coat. She rose, steadying herself against the frame of the bed, and crossed to the doorway. He looked up when she stepped outside, but didn't speak. Just offered a nod, then turned back to his work. She stood barefoot on the porch, the boards warm beneath her toes. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions. Rolling hills, a sliver of stream to the west, and sky that seemed to reach forever. The cabin sat like an island in it all, quiet, unseen. "I should leave soon," she said finally. He didn't look at her. "You'll need boots before you do." She glanced down. Her feet were still cut, healing in patches. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not," he said. "Not yet, anyway." She gave a quiet huff. "Not yet." Inside, she ate the beans he'd left simmering in a small tin pot. Every movement made her ribs throb, but she didn't complain. Eli came in a moment later and sat across from her, pulling off his glove. For a while, they ate in silence. Then she asked, "Why'd you help me?" He didn't answer right away. He wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned back in the chair, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind," he said finally. She nodded once. That was enough. Over the next few days, she began to move more freely. She swept the floor, washed linens in the creek, and cooked a simple stew. She didn't ask, and he didn't tell her to. It was as if both of them agreed. Chores filled the silence better than talk. But the silence didn't last forever. One night, as the fire snapped low and the wind rattled the shutters, she sat at the edge of the hearth, elbows on her knees. Eli poured 2 tin cups of whiskey and passed her one. She hesitated, then took it. The drink burned, but the warmth stayed. "My husband was a card player," she said, eyes locked on the flames. "Lost more than he won. One night, he came home with this grin, said he'd finally made good. Paid off every debt. I asked how. He wouldn't say." She paused. Her hand trembled slightly around the cup. 2 days later, 3 men came to our door. Said they had a claim on me. Said my husband signed papers. Said I was collateral. Eli didn't speak. I ran. Got caught. Escaped again. I don't know how many days passed before I ended up in your field. But I remember their voices. laughing when I fell. One said to leave me for the coyotes. Said that's all I was good for. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She stared into the fire, as if daring herself to disappear inside it. Eli shifted. You ain't theirs. I'm not sure I'm mine, either. He looked at her then. Not pitying. Not soft. Just steady. You can be, he said. She held his gaze. That thread between them tightened. She took another sip, her hands steadier now. The next morning, Clara asked if she could help mend the corral fence. Eli didn't argue. He handed her a hammer and nails and showed her where the slats were loosening. She worked quietly, brows furrowed in concentration, and he watched from a distance, careful not to hover, but close enough if she fell. She didn't fall. By midday they worked side by side. The sun beat down hard and sweat glistened on their forearms. She laughed once, light, sudden, when the hammer slipped and smacked her thumb. Eli chuckled, offering a cold tin of water. You ever run a ranch before? He asked. No, she said. But I know how to keep things from falling apart. He grinned at that. Later, while collecting firewood near the tree line, Clara spotted something that froze her blood. Horse tracks. Fresh. More than one set. She dropped the bundle of sticks and knelt to examine them closer. Deep prints, at least 3 riders. Heading east, but not far off course from the cabin. She returned with a tight jaw and told Eli what she saw. His face didn't change, but she saw the shift behind his eyes, the calculation, the cold readiness of a man who's seen trouble before. They're looking, she said. He nodded. Could just be passers-by, he offered. Or they're hunting. Clara stood straighter. I won't bring danger to your doorstep. I've brought enough already. He stepped forward, voice low. If you're being hunted, then you're staying. We'll deal with them if they come. She clenched her fists. You don't know what kind of men they are. I've known every kind, he said. And I've killed worse. For a moment, the air between them thickened. She searched his face for doubt, for fear. Found none. She looked down, her voice barely audible. I'm tired of running. Eli nodded. Then don't. That night, Clara didn't dream. She slept soundly for the first time in weeks. In the morning, she rose before the sun, pulled on a pair of old boots Eli had left by the door, and stepped outside. The prairie was still, the grass wet with dew, and she realized, with a sharp breath, that she wasn't afraid. Not yet. But something was coming, and she'd be ready. The storm rolled in low and angry, crawling over the horizon like a threat unspoken. By midday, the sky was bruised purple, and the wind had shifted, not in direction, but in intent. Eli stood on the porch sharpening his knife, and Clara knew before he said a word. She'd been watching the ridgeline beyond the pasture for hours, each heartbeat dragging as if the land itself had grown wary. She had seen them first. 3 riders, dark outlines framed against the shifting sky. No rancher rode like that, spread wide, slow on purpose. It was a hunter's formation. Their silhouettes vanished and reappeared in the hills like ghosts. Clara set down the kindling basket she'd been carrying and walked toward Eli. He met her eyes, then looked out toward the distant hills. The sharp edge of his jaw flexed. They found me, she said. They found us, he corrected. No more words were needed. They moved fast, not in panic but with grim precision. Eli locked the barn and led the animals into the back pasture. Clara bolted the windows and checked the rifle she'd learned to handle only days ago. Her hands were steady. She didn't feel like the woman who'd been carried in half-dead a week ago. That woman wouldn't have stood with her back straight, her eyes clear, and a shotgun balanced across her knees. By dusk, the wind was howling through the trees. The cabin's lanterns glowed dimly behind drawn curtains. Every shadow outside felt heavier. And then they came. The first knock wasn't a knock at all, but a boot striking wood. The second was louder, blunt and entitled. Eli stood by the door, shotgun cocked. You don't have to do this, Clara whispered. He didn't look at her. I'm not letting them take you. Another thud. Then a voice. slick as oil. Evenin'. Name's Amos Grigg. Don't suppose you remember me, darlin'? You were real slippery last time. Thought we'd come collect what's owed. Clara's blood went cold. She knew that voice. It still haunted her sleep. You're trespassing, Eli called through the door. You've got something that ain't yours, Grigg replied. I've got a woman with a name, not property with a price. A pause. Then the laughter started, deep and condescending. You one of them noble types, mister? Grigg asked. Let me tell you something, nobility gets you killed out here. The moment held. Then silence. Eli turned to Clara. You stay behind the kitchen wall. Second they breach the porch, shoot. She nodded. No fear in her face now. Only fire. The first shot came from outside. Splintered the top of the door. Eli fired back, dropping to the floor as glass shattered beside him. The wall thudded as a body slammed against it. Footsteps crunched on the porch. Clara breathed slow. She remembered what Eli had taught her. Don't pull the trigger in panic. Wait. Fire like you mean it. The second man came through the broken front door, rifle raised. She pulled the trigger. The blast filled the cabin. He dropped like a stone. Eli shouted something she didn't hear, already moving to the window. He returned fire into the dark, ducked as bullets tore through the shutters. Smoke curled through the room. Outside, thunder cracked. The storm had broken, and now the rain came, hard and slanting. It turned the field to mud, made the world a chaos of light and sound. Clara saw the third man circling toward the barn. She didn't think. Just grabbed Eli's spare revolver and darted out the back. Rain soaked her instantly. Her boots slipped in the mud, but she kept low, moving between barrels and crates. She found him near the side of the barn, lighting a torch. No, she yelled. He turned. She fired. The shot struck his shoulder. He screamed, dropped the torch. It hissed into the mud. She ran to him, kicked his gun away, then stood over him, chest heaving. You leave, she said through clenched teeth. Or I end it here. He groaned, crawling backward. From the cabin, more shots echoed. Then silence. Clara turned, heart pounding. Inside, Eli leaned against the doorway, bleeding from his side, but alive. Two bodies lay outside the porch. The storm soaked everything, but neither of them moved to go inside. Eli slumped down onto the floor, one hand pressing against the wound. Clara knelt beside him. Let me look, she said. It's just a graze, he muttered. It's bleeding too much for a graze. He didn't argue. She worked fast, pressing cloth to the wound, tying it off with a strip from her underskirt. Her fingers were shaking now, not from fear, but fury. All the strength she'd borrowed in the moment of action came flooding back as weakness. Eli reached up, touched her arm. You all right? She laughed once, bitter. I'm the one who's supposed to ask that. The fire in the hearth hissed from the wind, slinking through bullet holes. The cabin smelled like rain, smoke, and blood. They'll send more, she whispered. Let them try. She looked at him. For the first time, really looked. He was soaked, bruised, bleeding, and he hadn't flinched once. Why? She asked. Why are you willing to fight for me? He blinked, the pain dulling his expression. Because you didn't ask me to. She didn't know what to say to that. Outside, the wind began to settle. The rain slowed to a drizzle. Dawn hadn't come yet, but the worst of the night had passed. Clara sat beside Eli on the floor, one hand resting near his. Not touching, but close enough that the warmth passed between them. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. But she knew, with every ache in her body and every breath she still had in her chest, that something had changed. Not just in the cabin. Not just in the fight. In her. And there would be no going back. The storm passed slowly, leaving the world wet and quiet. Mud coated the porch and soaked into the boots Clara wore as she stepped over the broken threshold. The smell of gunpowder clung to the air, sharp and metallic, mixing with damp wood and scorched oil. Eli sat slouched in the corner, his shirt torn, the makeshift bandage at his side stained red but holding. He gave her a tired look, a faint twitch of a smile. "You're still on your feet," he muttered. Clara exhaled, crouching beside him. Her fingers pressed gently against the cloth, checking the knot. "So are you." He nodded, his breath catching when she tightened the bandage. "Barely. Still counts." Outside, the wind rustled the grasses like a sigh. 2 bodies lay in the yard, covered with Eli's old canvas tarp. Clara had dragged them herself before dawn broke. The man she'd wounded near the barn had crawled away under the fence line, bleeding, beaten, but alive enough to run. She didn't chase him. Not then. There was nothing triumphant about survival. It came with ash in the mouth and blood under the nails. But it was hers. Hard-earned. Eli rested a hand on her arm. "You should sleep." "So should you." "I will. Just needed to see the sun first." It peeked over the ridge now, slow and orange. The light hit the fields like fire touching gold. Clara stood and walked to the edge of the porch. The sight should have been peaceful, but something gnawed at her. That voice, the one that had laughed through the cabin door, still echoed in her mind. Amos Grigg hadn't been alone in this world. Men like him never were. She turned to Eli. "You think it's over?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, "No. Me neither." They buried the dead near the creek, far from the grave where Eli's wife lay. Clara insisted. She didn't want them resting anywhere near the place that had given her peace. Eli said nothing, just handed her the shovel and dug beside her. The work was slow, the soil heavy with rain. Neither of them spoke until the last mound was smoothed over, and Clara pressed a stone into the earth like a seal. She stayed silent through supper. Eli noticed but didn't pry. He watched her hands instead, how they gripped the tin cup, how her jaw tightened whenever a gust of wind rattled the shutters. She was wound tight again, like the moment before lightning struck. That night she couldn't sleep. The cabin was too quiet, the shadows too still. She rose without waking Eli, took the rifle from beneath the bed, and stepped outside. The stars were out, the sky a black ocean full of silver tears. She sat on the porch with the gun across her lap. Her breath plumed in the cold. She watched the dark line of the tree line. Eli's voice came from behind her, soft. "You expecting someone?" "No. Just don't like feeling unprepared." He walked over and sat beside her. The silence stretched again, but it didn't feel hollow this time. "You know," she said after a while, "I don't think I ever believed someone like you existed. Like me. Someone who'd protect without demanding anything back." Eli looked out over the grass. "I'm just a man who's buried too many things. That's what makes you different." They sat in silence for a while longer. The wind picked up. Coyotes howled in the distance, far off. Clara looked at him. "I don't know what comes next." He met her gaze. "You don't have to know. You just have to keep going." "I don't want to keep running." "Then don't." "You really think I could stay here?" His answer was steady. "If you want to." She considered the words. They held no pressure, no expectation, just truth. And for the first time in her life, Clara realized she wasn't waiting to be saved anymore. She'd already saved herself. Eli had only reminded her she was worth the effort. In the morning, she packed the saddlebag Eli gave her. Extra cartridges, dried meat, a flask of water. She strapped his old revolver to her hip and rolled up the map he'd drawn for her, a route north, far from where Amos Grigg had crawled away to lick his wounds. Eli watched from the porch, his arm still in a sling. "You sure?" he asked. "No," she said, swinging up onto the mare. "But I've been unsure most of my life. This time, I'm choosing it." He nodded. A long pause passed between them. "If you ever come back." "I know," she said, smiling faintly. "There'll be coffee." He smiled too. Not wide. Just enough to light something in his tired eyes. She turned the horse north and started riding, the sun rising behind her. The road was uncertain, the dangers real, but for once Clara wasn't afraid. She was moving forward on her own terms. And that was enough. Her silhouette vanished over the ridge as Eli stood there, still and silent, the wind tugging gently at his coat. He watched until there was nothing left but dust. Then he turned back inside. He would rebuild. The front door. The shattered windows. The life he thought had ended years ago. Some things, he'd learned, weren't gone, they were waiting to be found again. If you felt her story, if you saw yourself in her fire, in her fight, in the quiet power of choosing your own road, then don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you woke up in that hayfield?